most famous Neville Goddard quotes is that an assumption, when persisted in, will harden into fact, regardless of what's going on around you. And today, in the second part of my emotional intelligence, emotional regulation series that I'm doing here every Wednesday, I wanted to talk about your emotional reactions and what it means to actually persist in something. So when you're looking at an assumption that you're making, you have to remember that it doesn't matter what you're outwardly saying, it matters what you're inwardly feeling, dwelling in, and believing. And that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. What we're going to start with is talking about how to utilize your current beliefs to have key insight into your current identity, your state, where you're dwelling. And I want to back up just a minute and talk very quickly about a state and your identity and how they connect together. Anytime on my channel, a state or an identity is pretty much used interchangeably, and let me explain here. So a state is actually a state that you believe. This is how Neville Goddard uses it. It's how you condition your I am. So I am healthy, I am wealthy, I am sad, I am poor, I am blank. I am that I am. This is what Neville Goddard says all the time. So your state is what you place behind that I am. This can also be said about your identity. Your identity is the things that make up you. Your state is the things that make up you. And when you have things that you hold very close to your identity, what you believe true of yourself, or even the things that you want to believe true of yourself, the closer those things are to your identity, the more likely they are to trigger an emotional response when threatened. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit more. And trust me, this all kind of ties in together to make sure that you can manifest in the way that you want to manifest, right? Like it all does actually connect. So when you have an identity, you can visualize it as like there's a center being of you. At the center of you, you have what I kind of think of as like a me map. So it's your center, what you believe true. Now, the closer that things are to that center, the more important they are to your identity. And when threatened, those are going to create an automatic emotional response. Now, different people hold different things close to their core identity. So like somebody might have very strong feelings about their political affiliations. We're seeing that a lot currently, in our world, that people hold these very close to them. They may think that if their integrity or their honesty or loyalty is questioned, this could trigger a response because to them, that's very close to their key sense of identity. If your core sense of identity is very close to being a parent, your children being threatened is going to be very triggering for you. So the closer things are to your true identity, the more likely you are to have an emotional reaction to them. So when you start looking at your identity as your state, the place that you're dwelling, your emotional reactions to life can actually tell you what state you are dwelling in and what needs to change. It's not about fighting with yourself. It's about becoming very self-aware. If you've listened to a recent podcast episode of mine, I talked about how Neville Goddard actually broke up manifestation into 3 buckets: self-observation, so figuring out where you currently are, definition of aim, and detachment. So you have to be self-aware of your current behaviors. This is where emotional intelligence and regulation comes in. So if you think, let's say, that you are financially secure, your reactions to life is going to be a bit different than someone who does not feel like they're emotionally or they're financially secure. So let me explain like in a very simplistic way. If you go to the grocery store and you know that you do not struggle with money and your card gets declined, how is your reaction going to be compared to someone who feels like they are constantly struggling to get ahead? They always have more bills than the money that they have. Your reaction in that moment is actually going to be different, and not just externally, right? We're actually looking at the internal feeling. Your reaction in that moment is going to be different because of where you're dwelling, what you believe true of yourself. So whenever you want to make a change in life, the first thing to do is to start paying attention to those behaviors, because they'll show you what your state is. They'll show you what you hold closest to your identity. And this is such a key insight that you can actually use this to manifest and create a life that you want, because it actually allows you to know what is going on inside. What are you internally feeling? What's actually happening? So you can start to look at these emotional reactions to understand understand where you're coming from, where you're dwelling. This is such a huge key that I think so many people overlook, and this is how we're going to start talking about persistence. Let's think about it. If you are constantly persisting, or you feel like you're persisting in something and you're not actually seeing any movement in life, right? You are frustrated, you're kind of going in circles, you keep looking for new information of like, how can I make this work for me? Why isn't it working for me? Maybe I need a new coach, maybe I need some new process. I want you to first start to look at what you're actually persisting in. Now, this is a true test of your ability to be honest with yourself. It's not about beating yourself up. It's not about being frustrated with yourself. It's a true honesty check, right? I can look at certain things that are going on in my life and things that I want to change and understand completely where I'm dwelling. What am I paying attention to? Where am I putting my emotional focus? What are the things that I am actually doing? Not what I think I'm doing, not what I'm repeating on, like robotic affirmations. Not to say that those can't work for you, but where am I actually persisting? Am I persisting in being the person who has this thing emotionally, internally, in my identity and in my state? Or am I persisting in the person who desperately wants it? I see this a lot of times when I get messages about specific people, to be perfectly honest with you, where people say, well, I'm persisting in it. I know that person's going to be mine. Okay, but what are you actually persisting in? When we start to uncover it, what we usually find is that the persistence is in the lack of. They're behaving out of fear. So maybe they reach out and they continue to send messages that are not coming from a place of faith and love. Those messages are coming from a place of fear and desperation. I've been in the same position. Trust me, you are not alone in this. I completely understand it. I know what it feels like to be in those cycles. I know what it feels like when you're trying to figure out how to get ahead and actually get this stuff to work, and it's just not. And usually, actually, I shouldn't say usually, 100% of the time, it's because of what you're persisting in. And once you can start identifying what you're truly putting your attention into, pay attention to it, be honest with yourself, you will have one of the biggest breakthroughs you could ever imagine. It is shocking once you start to actually focus on what you're persisting in, where you're placing your attention, how you're truly behaving. Everything will change for you. Absolutely everything. So I want you to spend the next few days at least taking a look at what you're persisting in, where are your emotional reactions, how are you behaving, and what is truly like stuck right here, really close to your sense of self. Not only the good things, right, but also the things that you may want to change, right? Like my sense of self, my identity, the state that I'm dwelling in is that I'm ghosted. The sense of self, the identity that I'm dwelling in is that I'm never going to be good enough for my parents. The sense of self, the identity that I'm dwelling in is that I constantly can't get ahead of my bills and I can't seem to get this figured out. Once you start to uncover these, our next step will be how to overcome them. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. I would love to hear from you. You can also shoot me an email. It's unleashinghappiness@ceciliahendricks.com. And I wish you absolutely nothing but the very best.